Likutei Sichos, Chelik Chav, Volume 20, the first Sicha for Parshas Breishis. This Sicha, the Rebbe will explain that which is brought down in the first Rashi on the Torah. However, this is not your quote-unquote typical Rashi Sicha. Rather, the Rebbe will explain how what Rashi says applies to our Avodas Hashem. Just as a short introduction to familiarize ourselves better with some of the concepts that are brought up in the Sicha. First of all, whenever there's a question in the Torah, let's say in the Gemara you're learning a question, or in a Medrash, the question itself is Torah. That means the question itself needs to be studied. It's not just the answer that needs to, receive our attention, but the question itself means that it's a proper logic and is true according to the Torah, even after the question is answered. Another thing that we should be familiar with is klipas noiga versus the three klippas. Now, klippa means that you have generally things that are negative, we'll call them the negative forces in the world. You have what's called klipas noiga. Klipas noiga means, as it's brought down in Tanya, as it shines. There's some illumination that protrudes, so to speak, through the shell, which means that they have good in it. It's not revealed good. It needs to be brought out, but it is possible to be brought out. In other words, Hashem gives us access to it, and when done in the correct manner, meaning when it's used in the right way, those things that could have gone to the side of Klippa are now elevated and become full, let's just say full shine, full glow, Kedusha, versus the things in the world that stem from the three klipos hatmeyas, the three absolutely impure klipos. Those are things that the only way we can deal with them is by negating them. Why? Because they do not have any, so to speak, redeemable qualities. We cannot elevate them. It's like total darkness there. Another thing to familiarize ourselves with is the idea that the Chachamim say, the sages tell us, that when someone does proper tshuva mi'ava, from true dedicated love to Hashem, then one is able to take even this doinos, the felonious acts that one did, those things that are so terrible, that are so negative, and transform them. They become converted into zachiyos, into merits. Let's get into the Sichos. So on the pasuk Breishis bara Elokim, the very first pasuk, which says in the beginning Hashem created, Rashi brings the saying from Rabbi Yitzchak that says, quote, the Torah did not have to begin from here. Rather, it should have started from HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, which is chapter 12 in the book of Shmos, in the second book of the Torah. Why? Because that's the very first mitzvah. The Torah is about teaching us mitzvahs. That's where it should have begun. However, continues Rabbi Yitzchak, and what's the reason why? Pasach b'Bereishis. It opened up with Breishis, with the story of the creation. It's because, and he quotes the verse from Tehillim, from chapter 111, Koyach Maisov Higid La'amoy Losis Lahem Nachas Goyim. That Hashem, He revealed to His people His powerful works in order to give to them a heritage of nations. Now, Rashi explains that this is important for us to be able to answer, to counter the argument of the Goyim, of the nations of the world that say, Listim Atem, you are thieves, that you went and you conquered the lands of the seven nations. Right? How do we answer it? By telling them, listen, the whole world belongs to Hashem. Hashem told us how He created the world, and at one time He decided to give it to them to be custodians, to watch over it, but then He took it from them and gave it to us. And it's justified because it's His world. Now, if you really look closer to Rashi, look at the verbiage in Rashi. Rashi says, quote, the Torah didn't have to begin from Breishis. By the way, in fact, there are other quotations, there are other sources in the Medrash that say that the Torah didn't have to write it. But Rashi stresses that the Torah didn't have to begin with this. That means, if you follow Rashi's logic, it seems that what Rashi is saying is that indeed, the Torah did have to talk about this. It is an important thing in the Torah for us to know that Hashem created the world. However, Rashi's question is, why did the Torah have to begin with this? Why did it start with this? Instead of First, telling us some mitzvahs, and then telling us, by the way, Hashem created the world and so on and so forth. So in other words, it seems that over here the emphasis is that if this would have been written in the Torah elsewhere, not in the beginning, it would not have been a sufficient counter argument to this question, to this argument. But now that it begins with it, now it's a sufficient counter argument. So the question really is, if you think about it, let's think a little deeper, that it seems from this question, so to speak, the Torah didn't have to speak about it at all. That's what it seems to be saying. Really, the Torah didn't have to mention anything about this. Or it didn't have to say anything about the fact that Hashem made the world and so on. But it's just because there's an argument from some goyim, therefore, so to speak, the Torah was forced and had no choice to tell it to us. Could this possibly be that because an argument of some goyim, the Torah finds itself obligated to discuss a certain matter, to add words to the Torah, and moreover, to put it right in the beginning? Why is this so important that the Torah has to address it? In other words, why did the Torah feel compelled to address it? If anything, even if it was an important matter, perhaps it could have been given over like many other things in Yiddishkeit, many other matters that are passed down orally from generation to generation. In fact, we find in the Gemara a story with Gvir ben Sisa when there were certain nations that came to argue in front of Alexander Mukdon, Alexander the Great, that the Jews stole the land and way back then and so on and so forth, and he gave each one an answer, and he had answers which are not even clearly written in the Torah, but they were good arguments and they were effective. So why does the Torah feel compelled, if this is what it is for, in order to shut down the arguments of the Goyim? Why does it feel compelled to write in the first place? And like we said, moreover, it seems to be the emphasis that he had to begin with it. Why is this important? Says the Rebbe, from this we can conclude the obvious, that this is not just to counter the argument of some Goyim, but rather this is to teach us, the Yidden, how we Jews are to go about doing our avodah, to go about our service of Hashem. It's important for us to know it. In fact, if you look in Rashi, what is the pasuk that he's quoting? That pasuk from Tehillim, that verse says, Koyach Maisov Higid Le'amoy, that Hashem said the power of his doings to his people. That means this is not about focusing on the Goyim and trying to answer their arguments, but rather this is about us, his nation, quote unquote, knowing how to do and what to do in our avodas Hashem. It says the Rebbe, in order to understand this, we'll look at the biur, an explanation, esoteric explanation from the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, on these words where it says, quote, you conquered the lands of the seven nations. So he explains over there that what does it mean? What does it really mean on a deeper level, an esoteric level? What does it mean, this conquest of the nations? That it means, this is a reference to the fact that the Yidden, through their avodah, they conquer these lands in particular, and in general, the world. What does that mean? That when a Yid, quote, conquers earthly matters, material, physical matters, and converts it into Kedusha, into holiness, to the extent that he can even become Kodesh Kadoshim, Holy of Holies, and he can take an object that's an absolutely mundane object and turn it into something holy. It becomes a Chefza de Kedusha, becomes an object of holiness. Here is where the argument comes, Listim Atem, you are thieves. These things were under the control of the Goyim, under the control of the forces of Tumah. And here you come as a Yid, and you conquer it, and you take it away. And you not only take it away, but you actually transform it. Going from something material, it becomes something spiritual. This is where the argument is, that you are thieves. And on this comes the answer, no, the whole world was created by, and therefore belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it belongs to Hashem. And with his will, for whatever reason he had, he gave it to the side of the Goyim, so to speak, of the Tumah, and there we are supposed to come and take it and elevate it. But it's not theirs, it doesn't belong to them exclusively. The whole purpose actually is that the Yid should come and conquer it and elevate it and take it. And now we could understand the question that the Torah didn't have to, quote, begin with this. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, here's really the question on a deeper level. If you think about it, still, at the end of the day, when is a Jew in a higher level? When is the Yid a greater Yid, so to speak? When he's involved exclusively in Torah mitzvahs. When the Yid is sitting in shul and davening, when the Yid is sitting in Beis HaMedrash and learning, he's doing a mitzvah, that's when he's at a very elevated level. When he's involved in worldly matters, in the, quote, the lands of the Goyim, in the worldly matters, although true, he is doing it in the proper manner, which means in all your ways you should know him, and all your all your deeds have to be for the sake of heaven. But at the end of the day, it's his deeds. It's worldly matters. He's involved in mundane things. And there, it has really a direct connection to worldly things. It's just that he's able to somewhat direct it in a positive manner. So the real question is, according to what we explained, that what? That since a Yid could elevates it, therefore the Goyim have this argument. Who's allowing you to steal it? But now that we understand that a Yid, when he does Torah mitzvahs, is greater, now we can appreciate the question that Rashi asked, the emphasis. Why did he begin with this? Because at the end of the day, no matter how great it is, this conquest, but it seems that when a Yid is involved in Torah mitzvahs, that's even greater, that's even higher, it's even loftier. So why start with this? The answer is, says the Rebbe, that true, that this, quote, the avodas hakibush, this avodah mode of conquest, of taking away from the worldly things and turning it into kedusha, or as Chassidus called it, avodas habirurim, the avodah of elevating the sparks, it seems lower than exclusive Torah mitzvahs, than when one is totally detached from the world and is involved in Torah mitzvahs. However, what is Hashem's kavanah? What was his intent? What was his objective in creating the world? Well, as it says in the Medrash, that Nis'ava Kadosh Baruch Hu liyas lo yidira b'tachtonim, that Hashem had a desire to have a dira, to have a dwelling place in the tachtonim, in the lower elements of the world. And as the Alter Rebbe emphasizes, lemata she'ein lemata emenu, that in the lowest tier, that there's nothing lower than it. And that is the answer. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, if you think about it, although it seems, at least in the revealed manner, it seems that when a Yid is involved in Torah mitzvahs, he is on a more lofty level. He's so to speak, he's on a higher point, spiritually speaking. But if you really think about it, when a person is involved in worldly matters, and there he has to conduct himself according to Torah mitzvahs, and there he has to behave in a holy manner, that actually calls for and requires from him to tap in to the depth of the soul, to be able to connect to a much greater resources in order to be able to overcome the negativity that's pushing against him. In fact, over there he's on a much higher level in terms of connecting to his own soul. Because to be a good Jew when you're sitting in shul, to be a good Jew when you're in the middle of a shir of learning Torah, that's obvious. There you're connected to good. There you have that influence. But when you have a negative influence, you're out there in the world doing your business, conducting your day-to-day life, the mundane things, and there you want to be a Yid, and there you want to behave in a manner that's consistent with frumkeit. There is where you need to have a much greater connection to the depth of your soul, to tap into those greater resources. And now we can understand why Posach Breishis, why he began with Breishis, because the fulfillment of the kavanah of the Kadosh Baruch Hu making the world Dira Tachtonim is dafka when you're in the mode of, quote, conquering from the mundane, from the nations of the world, meaning from the earthly things. However, says the Rebbe, this would seem, at least at this point, that somewhat insufficient. Why? Because from what we explained, it comes out that the emphasis of why he had to begin with Breishis is to tell us, the Yidden, that the Avodas HaBerurim, meaning this mode of service of Hashem, of elevating the sparks of holiness, is our purpose, is our main purpose, and that's what really is the ultimate reason why Hashem created the world. But Rashi says something different. That's a good explanation. That makes a lot of sense. Why you had to begin with it. But Rashi adds something. Rashi says that this is in order to negate the argument of the Goyim that say, Listim Atem. How does this answer that? So the Rebbe says we'll understand it by taking a look at the two types of mundane matters, or the two types of worldly matters. There is what we know as klipas noiga, things, or call it divrei harishus, permissible things that are not inherently forbidden. However, it all depends on the person, how the person is going to use it, how he's going to channel. Is he going to channel it to good, or pull it down and ultimately bring it down to klipa? So when it comes to those matters, you have the aspect of kol masecha l'shem shamayim, quote unquote, which means all your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. That means it's your deeds, it's your ways, but you now direct it, you harness it for good, you harness it for positivity, right? But then that's one category. But then you have the other one, which is those things that are totally forbidden, dvorim ha'asurim, which their chayas comes from where? From the three klipos atmeis, from the three impure klipos, which although true, they do ultimately have some spark of holiness in them. There's got to be some spark of holiness, otherwise they couldn't exist. Nothing can exist without having some spark of kedusha. However, it is so concealed, it is so covered up that they remain forbidden. A person cannot have any direct contact with it, and the only way to deal with them, so to speak, is by negating them. The only time that they could be elevated is only in very rare instances, such as either becomes, let's say, batel baroiv, like if a drop of isur falls into an overwhelmingly greater amount of heter, or as we know, when a person does tshuva, zdoinois nasim kzochies, even the felonious acts become like merits. Now this latter category of the three klipas atmeya is where the goyim have their argument and they say, listimatem. So what that the person did tshuva? The fact is, the Torah itself tells you that you cannot elevate it to kedusha. The Torah itself is telling you that they are dvarim ha'asurim. They are forbidden matter. How could you suddenly, through certain acts, an act of tshuva, what have you, elevate it to kedusha? This is where the goyim, this is where the world argues, listimatem. How could it be that in certain rare instances you could actually elevate them? Here's where the answer comes. That sins from HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'atzmai, Hashem Himself, who's higher and beyond even Torah and mitzvahs. From there comes the power. That is the source of tshuva, true tshuva, which tshuva affects, that you should be able to transform even the zdoinos, even the negative, the felonious acts, and turn them into zachis, turn them into merits. Why? Because it says, Mimcha hakoil, everything comes from Hashem, even the forbidden things. And therefore, at the end of the day, since Hashem is the true, quote, owner of the world, even and especially those forbidden things, since His essence is beyond any limitations, any whatsoever restrictions, even those of Torah and mitzvahs, therefore, when somebody does tshuva in such a deep manner, they're able to tap in and reach atzmus of the Eibishter, the essence of the Eibishter. There they get the koyach to, quote unquote, steal away even from the isur, even from dvarim asurim, and convert it into good. And that's why it wasn't sufficient, as some versions had it, to just, quote, ask, why was it written in the Torah? It wasn't sufficient to just be written in the Torah. It had to actually start with this. It begins with this, because this is the basis of everything. That Hashem is the owner of the world. Hashem created the world. And therefore, when you connect yourself to Hashem, then you have the power not only to elevate those things that are typically given to elevation, that are typically allowed to be elevated, But even those things which are dvarim asurim, when a person truly taps in to that power of atzmos of the Eibishter, since the Eibishter owns everything, you're able to elevate even that.